So this is what a question on your quiz will look like. You've already learned it. This is just for review. Find the value of each trigonometric ratio from the smallest acute angle to the nearest thousandth. So first of all, what do we notice about this triangle? It's missing a side. It is a triangle. It is a right triangle. It's missing a side. How do I find the missing side when I'm given two sides? Yeah. The Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Which of these sides is c? Yeah, x, the missing side. So that means 48 and 14 are your legs. Keep in mind that on your quiz, you're not using the scientific calculator because you don't need it for this part. So you'll need to make sure you know how to square things. How would you square 48 manually? 48 times 48, which is 2,304. 14 squared is 196. And it equals x squared. Add 2,304 plus 196, and it is 2,500 equals x squared. How do we get x by itself?
We did x by itself.
Take square root. So x equals 50. All right, so that means our missing side is 50. We are going to find all of the trig ratios from the smallest acute angle. How do I figure out which is the smallest acute angle? Opposite of the smallest side. So opposite of 14. So C, which means 14 is my opposite. 50 is my hypotenuse, and 48 is my adjacent. So we're going to do sine, cosine, and tangent from angle C. You absolutely have to write what angle you're finding them from, or you are wrong. So sine of C is, sine is so. How do you spell so? S-O-H. So O over H, which is 14 over 50. It doesn't ask to leave in fraction form. If it asked for a fraction, you'd want to reduce. But you don't have to because it asked for decimal form. So what is this as a decimal? What is it? 0.28. Good. Good, good.
On the quiz, will we have to do it from decimal?
You're going to have to do both, just like here. Actually, yeah. Here we're not asked to do the fraction, but that's how you find the decimal. If you have a four-function calculator, how would you figure out what 14 over 50 is as a decimal? Yeah, 14 divided 50. Yeah. Okay, so cosine, how do you spell ca? So ca. C-A-H. So the adjacent goes on top. 48. Over the hypotenuse, 50. This is 0.96. And then tangent, so toa. So toa is opposite 14 over the adjacent 48, which is what as a decimal rounded to the nearest thousandth? 2.9. So 1/6. The 6 makes the 1 round up to a 2. This would be it. This is over what we learned yesterday. Use tangent to solve for the value of x. Round your answer to the nearest tenth. I know that isn't on your notes necessarily, the rounding part. But what you do is we label the sides from the given angle. So from 20 degrees, what kind of side is 10? Opposite. And then x is adjacent. So I know it says tangent in the directions, but on your test, you will need to be able to decide which trig ratio to use. But you would ask yourself which trig ratio deals with the opposite and the adjacent, and you would know that it is tangent. So tangent from what angle? From 20 degrees equals the opposite, which is 10, over the adjacent, which is x. All right, so is this written in such a way that I can just multiply both sides by 10? No. What do I need? Where do I need the 10 to be? on the bottom. So I'm going to flip both sides so that 10 can be on the bottom. We're going to multiply both sides by 10 to get rid of the fraction on the right side. We're rounding to the nearest tenth. So make sure you type in 10 times and then make that fraction pop up in your calculator. All right, and then what do I need to make sure I do with tangent of 20 to make sure I don't get an error message? Put some parentheses, yeah. Close that parenthesis. All right, and then what do we get rounded to the nearest tenth? What is it? 27.5. Correct. All right, so now we're going to apply this to sine and cosine. Same process, we're just going to be using sine and cosine today. Okay, before we do, we're going to start with the basics of sine and cosine. We're going to find sine of s, sine of r, cosine of s, and cosine of r. So they write it like this, but we're going to find it in a slightly different order. We're going to find sine of s, then cosine of s, since we would already have the triangle labeled. And then we will find sine of r and cosine of r. All right, so we're going to do the s first. So from angle s, we're going to label the triangle. Which of these is the hypotenuse? 65. Which of these is my opposite? 63. And then which is my adjacent? 16. So sine, so this is what the directions look like on your quiz. Right? Each answer has a fraction and as a decimal. Now here we want it to 4 places. I believe on your quiz it's only 3. But nonetheless, we're going to write it as a fraction. We want to make sure we reduce as much as possible. And then we're going to make it a decimal. So sine is so, opposite over hypotenuse. So what is my fraction going to look like? 63 over 65. Can this be reduced? It cannot. They don't have the same number divisible. What is this as a decimal rounded to 4 places? 9, 6, 9, 2. Good. I'm even going to box it because that's a fourth of the answer. All right, cosine. SOCA. So, I didn't mean to say SOCA. SOCA twice, but here we are. The adjacent is going to go on top, which is 16. Hypotenuse on the bottom, 65. Can this be reduced? It cannot. What is it as a decimal rounded to 4 places? Is it 1 or 2? 2? Okay. 0.2462. Sorry if it's light. 2462. Now we're going to do everything for r. So we did all of s, so we didn't have to relabel a triangle. We're going to do r and relabel it. Which of these sides will stay the same? The hypotenuse. Which is now my opposite? 16, and then my adjacent? 63. So sine from r, opposite over hypotenuse, what's my fraction? 16 over 65. Which we already know is a decimal is 0.2462. Which I'm sure you can guess now what happens with cosine of r is adjacent over hypotenuse. So that is 63 over 65, which we already know is 0.9692. This is not a coinkydink. You know it's called sine and cosine? That's because they go together. They have a relationship that you're actually going to learn right now. So if you look, sine of r is the same as cosine of s. Sine of s is the same thing as cosine of r. And there is a reason. The sine and cosine are complements of each other. What does complement mean? They add up to what? 90. So they add up to 90. So here's what happens. This section might be written weird, but it's a very simple property. What's going to happen is sine of A is going to be equal of cosine of B because they are complements of each other. So let me show you what that looks like. What is sine of angle A in my picture? What is A? It's not on your notes. We're just looking at the screen. What is it? 74. So sine of angle A is going to be equal to cosine of angle B. What is angle B? 16. So I want Noah, can you type in sine of 74? And Alana, can you type in cosine of 16? We're around to the thousandth. 0.961. And what did you get, Noah? 0.961. They are equivalent to each other. So you're going to be asked to rewrite sine in terms of cosine. You want equivalent sayings. So here's how you do it. To rewrite sine in terms of cosine, you write cosine. And then since they are complements of each other, you're going to take 90 and subtract 74, and you'll get 16. Okay, it is true for the opposite. If I had cosine of 74, it is going to be equal to sine of 16, because these two are complements of each other. So all you're going to be asked to do in this section is write the other word. So if you have sine, write cosine. If you have cosine, write sine. Then you're going to subtract from 90. Okay, I promise it'll make sense. Let's do our examples here. We're going to write cosine 23 in terms of sine. So we're going to write the word sine, S-I-N. And then we're going to subtract 23 from 90. What is 90 minus 23? 67. This is the answer. Cosine of 23 is the same as sine of 67. Notice how it is written. It just says S-I-N 67. It does not have colons. It does not have equal signs. It does not have a dash. It has sine 67. That's it. If you typed these into your calculator, you would get the same decimal. You get the same trig ratio. Okay, that is how you can check yourself. All right, and then we're going to do the same thing with the second question. Write sine of 56 in terms of cosine. So you want to write cosine. 90 minus 56 is 34. So again, you can type both of them into your calculator and check that they are the same fraction, or same decimal. So this section is not hard. It's just that students don't look over it before their test, and you're going to get it wrong if you don't remember. So make sure you put a star next to it. There's 15 questions on Monday's quiz, and this is one of them. So be prepared. So now we're going to use what we learned yesterday, but with sine and cosine. We're going to find the values of u and t using sine and cosine. Round your answers to the nearest tenth. So step one was to label all of the sides from the angle they gave us. So what angle did they give us in the beginning of this problem? 65. So we're going to label all of the sides. Which of these is the hypotenuse? 8, which is the opposite? T, and then which is the adjacent? U. So step one, label all the sides. Step two is to set up a trig ratio. First of all, there's 3 trig ratios for this very reason. Yesterday we talked about tangent. Tangent would not work here, and I'll show you why. Tangent from 65 would equal the opposite over the adjacent. So what would the opposite be? T, and the adjacent would be U. Do you have enough information to solve this problem? No. Not the way I wrote it. No. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick one variable and the side they gave you and go from there. So which variable do we want to solve for first? T. And the side they gave us was 8. Okay, so we always want to use a side we know and a side we don't know. Okay, which trig ratio deals with these two sides? Sine, because we're educated. Sine. Sine from angle 65 equals the opposite, which is t, over the hypotenuse, which is 8. T is being divided by 8. So what is the opposite of dividing by 8? Multiplying by 8. So you type this into your calculator exactly how you see it. There is no fraction, so do not type in a fraction. We are rounding to the nearest tenth. Point 3. for the second, we're going to do the same thing, except for, here's my word of caution. Don't use the side you just found to find the next side. You could be wrong. You rounded to this answer. If you use it in anything and round again, and either use tangent or cosine or whatever, you're going to be way off. So I always use the side they gave us because I know no matter what I do, the hypotenuse is 8. Okay, so I always use the side they gave us, and then I'm going to use the side I don't know. So I'm going to use 8 and u, which are the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So which trig ratio are we going to use here? Cosine. Cosine from 65 equals the adjacent, which is u, over the hypotenuse, which is 8. Do I need to flip this one? I do not. The 8 is on the bottom, so I'm just going to multiply by 8 to cancel it out, and then round to the nearest tenth. What is it?
3.4.
Correct. So here's a way to check yourself. I know a lot of you like to. Which is the biggest angle? Don't overthink it. 90. It's across from the biggest side, 8. What's going to be the smallest angle? Yeah, it'll be 25. This one. And it's going to be across from the shortest side, which we said was 3.4. And then the medium angle is 65. It's going to be across from the medium side. Every time. If it's not that way, then you did not solve it correctly. Okay? All right, we practice this one as well. We got this one and one more. So same process, find the values of x and y using sine and cosine, round your answers to the nearest tenth. So from 35, we're going to label all the sides. Which of these is the hypotenuse? 53. Which of these is opposite? X. And then adjacent is y. So which side do we want to solve for first? X, sure. And they gave us the hypotenuse. So which trig ratio are we going to use? Sine, good. Sine from 35 equals the opposite, which is x, over the hypotenuse, 53. X is being divided by 53, so the opposite of that is multiplying by 53. We did not have to flip it, because 53 was on the bottom. So 53 times sine of 35. What is it?
30.4.
30.4. Sorry, I needed to sneeze and then it left, and that's really annoying. All right, and then we want to find y. Again, always use the side they gave us. So which trig ratio am I going to use to solve for y? I have my adjacent and my hypotenuse. Cosine. Cosine from 35 degrees equals the adjacent, which is y, over the hypotenuse, 53. Do I need to flip this? No. Just multiply by 53. So 53 times cosine of 35. What is it? Yes, 43.4. Which makes sense. 35 is the smallest angle, so it's going to be across from the shortest side, which was 30.4. 53 is the biggest side, and 43.4 is going to be the medium side. Okay? Before we do the last question, I'm going to teach you a word. I'm actually going to teach you both words. Go ahead and write down angle. So just find room somewhere at the bottom. Angle of elevation, and we're going to talk about angle of depression. Angle of elevation and angle of depression. We're going to draw a ground and a stick figure for both of them. Or a real person if you so choose. And he's got eyes. There you go. All right, so angle of elevation and angle of depression are used a lot in trigonometry. Angle of well, we do elevation first. Elevation, what direction do you think of? Up. Okay, so angle of elevation is what happens when you look up to an object. You're going to find the angle at which you look up to it. So here's what happens. Every angle has two rays, right? Two lines that make up the angle. One of them, for both angle of elevation and angle of depression, will always be a horizontal line. So I want you to draw a horizontal line from your person's eyeball. Sorry. Draw a dotted line looking up to an object, and then an arrow showing that it is measuring this angle between those two rays. So you'll see it a lot. Romeo has an angle of elevation to Juliet in the top of a tower, that kind of thing. If you're short, you always have an angle of elevation. If you're tall, you always have an angle of depression. So think of depression, you think of sad, you think of being down. Angle of depression looks downward. It's going to have the same horizontal line. It's invisible, okay? But it is an angle that opens downward to an object. But what you need to always know is there's always a horizontal line. Or a horizontal ray, if you will. So I would write that in. There's always a horizontal ray. It's like your baseline. So angle of depression, you'd be looking down at an object. Angle of elevation, you look up at an object or a person. I show you a picture really quick before we move on. So this guy has an angle of depression down to, I think it's a girl. But there's your horizontal line, and then this angle is opening downward. She has an angle of elevation to him. There's a horizontal line showing where her eyesight starts, and the angle upward to him. Okay, so you always have a horizontal line. All right, we're going to use it here. There's already a picture, though. You're skiing down a mountain with an altitude of 1,200 feet. What is another word for altitude? Height, yeah. The angle of depression is 21 degrees. So it's already drawn for you, but you can see the horizontal line and the angle opening downward as you go down the slope. Find the distance x down the mountain to the nearest foot. So, can I use the Pythagorean theorem here? No. This is an angle and a side. I don't have two sides. I can't find the third side. So, we're going to use a trig ratio. We need to decide which one. So, we're going to label the sides. What kind of side is 1,200? Opposite. What kind of side is x? The hypotenuse. I know it's hard to see because it's on the inside of the triangle. What is the hypotenuse? So which trig ratio are we going to use? Sine. Sine from 21 degrees equals the opposite, 1,200, over the hypotenuse, x. So is this written in the correct way, or do I need to flip it? Need to flip it. Flip both sides. 1 over sine of 21. All right, when it's written correctly, now I can multiply both sides by 1,200 to cancel out that fraction. So 1,200 times 1 over sine of 21. And we're rounding to the nearest foot. So nearest whole number. What is it? 3,349 in the feet. Sorry, I shouldn't hear you. Which people are like, wow, that's a really big number. That's not even a mile. It's about a half a mile. It's a little over a half a mile, which isn't very much when you're skiing. And then keep in the context that the shorter side was 1,200 feet, so 3,000 something sounds normal.